Welcome to the Genealogy Radio Show, the radio show that's keeping you in the loop. The radio show airs from Radio Corkabashkin in beautiful Kilkee in County Clare. The Genealogy Radio Show is dedicated to providing some resources and sources for those all over the world who may never visit Ireland, but who may be interested in how family history and the lore of genealogical records work, and to get a bit of assistance and help in how to research as well in genealogy. This week's show is all about the importance of genealogy and why it does matter. Genealogy is full of antiquity in Ireland, and it doesn't always fit to plan that it's a kind of matter of dates and accuracy and keeping it all so clean as all that. So this week's show is going to go back into the past and look at the sources and the lore for Irish genealogy and why it was important 1,000 years ago and 2,000 years ago and why it's important now. We need to talk about some of the traditions to determine that as well. So Irish genealogy is the study of individuals and families who originated in the island of Ireland, but it's also about telling us that we're from groupings in Spain and devoting a legacy from a genealogical doctrine. Genealogy was cultivated from the start of the Irish historic era, and because we know this because of the bards being inaugurated, and poets are believed to have recited the ancestry of the inaugurated king to stress the hereditary right to rule. We know this because we've got inauguration sites that exist, and that would be the O'Brien Mire, about 2 miles away from Quinn, where there would have been a mound and this was used traditionally for lots of other historical purposes as well. So it's a point of high importance and a place of geographical place that should be remembered. With the tradition to written culture, oral history was preserved in monastic settlement. Davy O'Cronin believes that the Gaelic genealogies were written down soon after this practice of annalistic record, and they were compiled by the monks. So that's where we get the Annals of the Four Masters, the Annals of Inishmalla, the Annals of Connacht, the Annals of Lough. They're freely available, by the way, on the website of UCC, of the CELT website, the Corpus of Electronic Language and so on. And it's a wonderful project, and it's one that could really be supported by you going in and having a look and seeing all the different types of records that are available. The monks wanted to work out the feast days and so on, and they had other agendas perhaps when writing the genealogies, but they were also supported in where they were and how they existed by the ruling patronage and the might of those who were in power. So there would have been strong links within the families and between families for these records. Then we have it gathering speed, where we get a multiplicity of new families gaining power and wanting to take part in this dynastic power sharing. And we have Lowery Mania, the Book of Ballymote, the Book of Leinster, the O'Clery Book of Genealogies. There are some wonderful projects in Ireland, and one of them is the Royal Irish Academy, where you can see some of those manuscripts, and they won't be translated for you, but sometimes they are translated in some pages. So it's really important that you would explore where all these records are online. Genealogy always has an agenda, and that is true for all history, and a lot of geographies as well. There's always an agenda. The person writing it has an agenda. Genealogy determines the legal rights, though, of those individuals over to power. And that's why genealogy matters, because if you study the genealogy, no matter how flawed, of what is happening 1,000 years ago, you understand how power sharing works. It was pursued by the Gaelic learned classes, and in fact they would have resented new genealogists coming in the 16th century, starting to do things in a different way, because they turned around and said that they would say anything just to gain power and so on, and that they weren't accurate and so on. So there's a lot of tradition and a lot of rules and regulations surrounding genealogy. From 1100, the families such as the O'Clearys, the O'Dignagons, the McKagans, the McAnvards also became professional historians. They were employed by ruling families. So it gives you both sides. It gives you the ruling families and the literati and so on. And I know Luke McInerney has written on this in County Clare, and I have not read his book yet, but I must get that out and do a review on it as well. But in Ireland, we have the O'Connors, the O'Neills, the O'Donnells, the Kellys, the Murphys, the McMurraghs, the McCarthys, the O'Briens, and so on. We have hundreds and hundreds of Irish family surnames, and that's why we like to look at those, because it brings us back to the antiquity of the past and so on. But we also have the family trees of the Fitzgeralds, the Butlers, the Burkes, the Plunketts, the Birminghams and others. Because Ireland is a country of flux where people come in, they go out, and they have now reached record levels worldwide in the fact that a lot of people can claim Irish origin and so on. We have hereditary ecclesiastical families, people who are dispossessed, who have to turn into medical families or go into the church. And this dispossession is important because it leads to different career routes, and I study this a lot in County Clare. We have the knowledge and the origins and the history of many of the families, and this tradition has occurred right till today. People in Ireland love to trace their Irish genealogy, and they love to practice it amongst the Irish and its diaspora. I get emails and letters all the time for people looking for their family histories, and they want to know, they know that they're Irish, and with DNA it has increased tenfold that people have found that they have Irish origins and they wish to explore same. So Davy O'Cronin and Nullig O'Morrell consider that the Irish genealogical tradition has the largest national core in Europe. And that's a strong claim, one that can be backed up with a lot of the resources that we look at. It's important to realise that there was a doctrine that dated from the 10th to the 12th century, and it was demonstrated by certain genealogists at that time, and they would have claimed that all Irish were descendants of Mil Hispania. And you might say, well, that's in the 10th century, what does that matter? Well, in the 16th century, this is why they refer to themselves in letters when they're writing to the Pope or writing to other kings looking for support, and trying to gain the access to foreign armies. They say, we are the sons of princes of Spain. That's where that connection comes from. So that's very important to realise that doctrine 600 years later from its inception is really important to those who are in power in Ireland. Because it explains, well, we're not just looking at trying to be the sons of Spain becomes a very, very powerful point of power in the 16th century and the 15th century. So it's not trying to tie into that, but it is in a way. It's trying to say our relationship with you goes back a very, very long way. We are descended from the same people and so on. And even to get into the Spanish army and the commissions, a pedigree showing your Irish ancestry would have been really, really important and would have had to have been sent over. We've covered that with the origins of Texas and so on, with the Irish genealogy that goes on there in previous shows. So it's really important to realise that it isn't so much the historical accuracy, it's the importance that people who are in power, who are giving power and giving routes of access to careers, are in genealogy. And that's why genealogy matters. It matters because it tells you how people end up, where they end up, with the positions they end up in, and it is through their social networks. So it's important because of that. It was enhanced and embedded by successive historians, and some of these were poets, and we have some manuscripts which have been stitched together to provide poems of genealogy. So we have O'Higgin and O'Divagon, a poem stitched together. They wouldn't have even lived at the same time. I've done some work historically on this because it's quite a famous poem, and it has been, people don't realise that they weren't writing together because the manuscripts were stitched together. By 1600, families were sometimes given spurious Irish ancestry and origin legends, but by the late 1600s, it would have been just as important to divorce yourself from that Gaelic ancestry and to make sure that you were able to gain access to power through a different route because the Tudor conquest had come into play. Now, the first historian to question you're looking at Dovagach MacFershig, who was murdered in 1671. And his Lawer na Gaeilgeannach includes disparate and various recensions. So he starts to argue about the record. He just doesn't take it as being fact. He starts to change it. He didn't try to make it into a whole unified project. And he put it in sometimes unaltered and so on. Now, doctrine was accepted by John O'Donovan and O'Curry and so on, and you get a nationalistic interpretation of Irish history. And that's not valuable when Ireland isn't actually a nation, if you like, at some of the times that these genealogies are given. We have stronger links with Scotland in sometimes than what we have within our own countries, and there's a to and fro which we've looked at with poets escaping to Scotland and so on. But we have some very wonderful historians such as Kenneth Nichols, so on, that have done some fantastic pedigree work, and it's really important to see what these manuscripts are that are collected. So we've got the Book of Ballymote. So if you research that would be important. The Book of the Burks. We've got Lawer na Gaeilgeannach, the Great Book of Lecan, the O'Clery Book of Genealogies, Lever Imania, the Book of Leinster, the Book of Lecan. And if you go on to the Royal Irish Academy website, there is a manuscripts link, and you will be able to see many of the other aspects there as well. There's also the Irish Genealogical Office in Ireland, and that really works very well when you're trying to see the pedigrees. You might look and say, some people might say, well, that's not accurate at all. Well, it may not be accurate, but it's showing you what was important to people at that time. So it's making sure you understand what's important to the people at the time. Burke's peerage, Burke's landed gentry, Lodge's peerage is really important as well because it goes back further. And we end up with some wonderful histories and how to navigate that at the time. Now, genealogy has been used in Irish ancestry to displace, to incorporate, to form links. And one of the things that hasn't been looked at very much is the relationship between foster families within major families as well. And this is really important because it's how they formed networks and social allies and how that happened. And I'm going to be doing a lot of work on pledges and how land gets distributed to underneath that system. And I'll do a radio show on that because it's very important to understand how land gets worked in with a foster brother and so on, and gives a right to a certain needing family to be there because of their foster brothers, because of that relationship, which is little looked at in relation to clan works in Ireland. It's all very much seen as one surname, very homogenous, and not linking with the other networks or how they're forming relationships of fosterage. And it's important to realise that those relationships kept dynasties alive because of the manpower they could support each ruling family, and so on. Now, there'll be a lot of things coming up in Irish genealogy, and we know that Back to Our Past will be coming up in October, and that's a wonderful show. And I know I hope to be there this year with clans and surnames, and also just there to give advice and so on, and help and assistance for the Genealogy Radio Show. The Genealogy Radio Show has now podcast over 100 shows, and they are up online on the clansandsurnames.com website. We have a link on that. They're freely available, free of charge, and we've really enjoyed undertaking and doing that research at the time. Now, I referred to Celt, which I have done a show on, but I'd like to just go into it again because it's important that you see just what other sources are available. And I have to go in to remind myself, because it is an online resource for Irish history, and it's most suitable for the importance of genealogy sources that we're talking about today. And the importance, if things are important to a people, it doesn't negate it to say, well, that it doesn't matter. It's very important to the people, so therefore it does matter. Whether or not it's historically accurate is another matter. That is a matter of a different argument. And we know that, for example, that we don't go back to Adam, but it was important to Elizabeth I to have a family tree, getting her ancestry right back to Adam in the Bible. We know that can't be true. The fact that she placed such a great store on genealogy and genealogical legacies shows that influenced the whole history of those courtiers that were around and how they felt that genealogy needed to be developed and so on. So on the UCC, Celt.ucc site, we have the Annals of Ulster, and they give you records from AD 431 to 1201. And further up, the volume 2, going right up to 1541. We have the Annals of Tigernach, the Annals of Idishfallen, the Annals of the Four Masters. Bernadette Cunningham has written a great deal on these, and there's some great publications on that. We have McCarthy's book, because we have fragments of Irish annals. We have the Dominican Annals of Roscommon, Chronicum Scrotorum, and we have the Din Shenachus by E. Gwynn. So there has been additions here since I have looked at this last, and I definitely need to start to brush up on it and do a new show on it. We have the death tales of the Ulster heroes, the Táin Bó Cúailnge from the Book of Leinster, the training of Cuchulainn, the Finn McCool, the pursuit of all sorts of things, and the Gaelic abridgment of the book of Sir Marco Polo, the wandering of, it's absolutely wonderful, the Irish lives of Guy of Warwick and Bevis of Hampson. I'm definitely going to go into this and having a good look. We have French Catalan and Occitan texts, 13th to the 16th century, a statute enacted in Kilkenny, the Song of Dermot and the Earl, the French text 17th to the 19th century, the translation from Spanish into Irish, German texts, so on, the 14th to the 15th century, Joseph Ben, Edmund Spencer, Thomas Lee, Nicholas Arnold, Thomas Walker, Robert Payne, Henry Dowcra, John Dimmock, Sir John Davis, Hugh Collier. I'll be looking at all these later on today, all the treatises. It's just saved me, I'd say, about 2 years to be looking into this today. We have guides as well, the Guide to Killarney and Glengarve. Later on, writers, The Miseries and Beauties of Ireland by Jonathan Binns, Thomas Osborne Davis, A Chronology of Ireland, and so on. So please do go into that site, and I'll put a link and I'll write a blog on it later on today. So genealogy does indeed matter, and it is important that we realise that in many ways it feeds into the history of any place or any people, and how people are displaced, moved on, brought in, all that becomes part of the fabric of genealogies. If they're excluded, when people are not named, when they're silenced, when so on, when their work is silenced, you see that exclusion meaning something as well, because the silence is deafening. And we've often heard that, silence is deafening. And that is very true, because one will always say, well, what's going on there? Why didn't they mention that? And that will give a legacy and a power. So how we view these histories is very important. So that's all for today, and thank you very much for listening. You can contact me at any time, and at the moment I'm involved in getting new emails, which are probably easier to contact me with, and I'll have a contact form on various different sites, because it's come to that we need that contact form where people can put in their queries of what they would like covered and so on. The Genealogy radio show has gone from strength to strength and been such a rewarding exercise. So that's all for today. Goodbye for now.